His hand found mine in the darkness of the cabin, steady and warm against my trembling fingers. The plane shuddered again, and I squeezed his palm so hard I thought I might break something. Through the roar of the storm outside and the chaos of my own panic, his voice cut through like a lifeline. "Breathe with me, Sarah. In through your nose. 4 counts. Hold it. Now out through your mouth." I didn't know this man. 20 minutes ago, he was just the stranger in the expensive suit sitting beside me in seat 14B, scrolling through documents on his tablet with the detached efficiency of someone who flew more often than he drove. Now, his hand was the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart at 35,000 feet. "I can't," I gasped, my chest constricting as another wave of turbulence threw the aircraft sideways. "I can't breathe. I can't." "Yes, you can?" His voice remained impossibly calm. "Look at me. Focus on my eyes, nothing else." I forced myself to turn my head to meet his gaze through the tears blurring my vision. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the dimmed cabin lights, and they held mine with an intensity that somehow anchored me to reality. The plane dropped again, and I let out a strangled cry. But he didn't look away, didn't flinch. "My name is Daniel," he said, still holding my stare. "Daniel Carvalho. And I've been on more flights than I can count. This turbulence is severe, but it's survivable. The pilots have handled worse. I need you to trust me on that." Trust. Such a simple word for something I'd forgotten how to do. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 47 years old, and until that flight from Dallas to New York, I had never set foot on an airplane, not once in nearly 5 decades of life. Some people would call that remarkable. I called it survival. The Mitchell Ranch had been in my family for 4 generations. 120,000 acres of West Texas scrubland where we raised Angus cattle, under a sky so vast, it made you feel like both a king and a speck of dust at the same time. My great-grandfather had built the original homestead with his bare hands. My grandfather had expanded it during the oil boom. My father had kept it running through droughts, market crashes, and 2 heart attacks. And then he died, leaving it all to me. That was 12 years ago. 12 years of rising before dawn to check the herds. 12 years of negotiating with feed suppliers, veterinarians, and banks. 12 years of doing everything myself because there was no one else left to do it. My mother had passed when I was 19, breast cancer that took her in 8 months. My brother had fled to California before the funeral flowers wilted, claiming he couldn't stand the isolation of ranch life. He sold me his share of the inheritance for a fraction of what it was worth and never looked back. So it was just me and the cattle, me and the endless fences that always needed mending, me and the ranch hands who came and went with the seasons, me and the crushing weight of a legacy I couldn't afford to let die. I had become hard in those years, not cruel, but weathered, like the mesquite trees that bent with the wind but never broke. I learned to birth calves in the middle of ice storms, learned to negotiate with men twice my size who assumed a woman couldn't run a cattle operation, learned to sleep alone in that big farmhouse without letting the silence drive me mad. What I never learned was how to ask for help. The financial troubles had started slowly, then accelerated with terrifying speed. A drought that killed our grazing lands, a disease that swept through the herd, feed prices that tripled while beef prices plummeted. I'd mortgaged everything, the house, the equipment, the land itself, just to keep the operation breathing for one more season. And now it was all coming due. Marcus Whitmore, my accountant, had been the one to find the investors, a group of New York financiers interested in sustainable agriculture, looking for established operations to fold into their portfolio. They weren't buying the ranch, they were offering a partnership, an injection of capital that could save everything. But they wanted to meet me in person. They wanted to see the woman who'd kept a dying operation alive, through sheer force of will. "You have to fly to New York," Marcus had said, his face apologetic on the video call. "They won't negotiate over Zoom. These people are old school. They need to shake your hand, look you in the eye." I had hung up and vomited in the bathroom sink. Flying meant leaving the ranch. Flying meant putting my life in the hands of strangers. Flying meant surrendering control in a metal tube hurtling through the sky, miles above the solid ground that had always been my only certainty. But losing the ranch meant losing everything. So there I was, strapped into a seat designed for someone much smaller, watching the Texas landscape shrink to a patchwork quilt below, telling myself that millions of people did this every day without dying. The first hour had been manageable. White-knuckled, yes. Heart racing, absolutely. But manageable. Then the storm hit. The captain had announced we'd be flying through some light turbulence. I've since learned that pilots are the worst liars in the world. The plane began to shake like a dog trying to rid itself of water. The overhead bins rattled. Somewhere behind me, a child started crying. The seatbelt sign blazed on with a harsh ding, and a flight attendant stumbled down the aisle, gripping headrests for balance. That was when the panic attack began. I'd had exactly 2 panic attacks in my life before that moment. The first when my father died and I stood in the hospital hallway realizing I was truly alone. The second when the bank called to tell me they were beginning foreclosure proceedings if I missed another payment. Both times I'd been on solid ground. Both times I'd been able to walk outside, plant my feet in the dirt, and breathe until the world stopped spinning. 35,000 feet above Arkansas, there was no dirt, no outside, no escape. My vision tunneled, my chest compressed. I couldn't get enough air no matter how hard I gasped. I was going to die. We were all going to die. The plane was going to break apart in the storm, and they'd find pieces of us scattered across the Ozarks. And the ranch would pass to some distant cousin who would sell it to developers before my body was even cold. Breathe with me, Sarah. Daniel's voice again, cutting through the spiral. His hand, warm and solid around mine. Tell me about your ranch, he said, and the request was so unexpected that it actually made me pause mid-gasp. What? Your ranch? I noticed the boots. He nodded toward my feet, the only pair of shoes I owned that weren't covered in mud or manure. Good leather Ariates, broken in but polished for the occasion. And the calluses on your hands. You work with cattle? The plane lurched again, and I crushed his fingers, but he didn't complain. Angus, I managed. We raise black Angus, grass-fed when the grass cooperates. How many head? I forced myself to focus on the numbers, the familiar territory of my daily life. 300, give or take. Used to be closer to 500 before the drought. That's still a substantial operation. How much land? 120,000 acres. The pride crept into my voice despite everything. Most of it's scrub, but the water rights alone are worth... Another drop. The engine screamed as the pilots fought the crosswind. Someone's coffee cup went flying, splattering across the ceiling. A flight attendant spoke urgently into the intercom about remaining seated. Keep talking, Daniel said firmly. Tell me about a typical day. What time do you wake up? 4:30. I closed my eyes, trying to picture it. The dark kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing on a timer, the way the stars looked through the window over the sink before dawn painted them away. I checked the weather first, then the cattle prices. Then I saddle up Ranger. He's my horse, a quarter horse I've had since he was a foal. And I ride out to check the herd. Every day? Every day. They need to see you. Know you're watching. Cattle are smart enough to get into trouble, but dumb enough to not get themselves out of it. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Sounds like most of my clients. I surprised myself by laughing. It was a strangled, hiccuping sound, but it was still a laugh. The plane was still shaking. I was still terrified. But somehow focusing on the details of my life, the mundane routines that had felt like chains for so long, was making the terror manageable. What do you do? I asked, realizing I'd been talking about myself without giving him a chance to speak. I mean, besides saving strangers from falling apart on airplanes. Mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance. I help companies buy other companies or help them avoid being bought. That sounds... I searched for the right word. Soulless? He offered it without bitterness. Cold? Mercenary? I was going to say complicated. It can be. He shifted slightly in his seat, and I became aware that I was still clutching his hand like a lifeline. I should let go, I thought, but I didn't. I've been doing it for 25 years. Started as an analyst straight out of business school, worked my way up to partner at the firm. He paused. Now I mostly handle the deals that nobody else wants to touch. Why would nobody want them? Because they're messy, emotional, family businesses where feelings matter more than spreadsheets. His eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe, or understanding. Companies that are failing not because of bad numbers, but because people have given up. The turbulence began to ease, the shaking reduced to a tremor, then to the gentle vibration of normal flight. The seatbelt sign remained on, but the tension in the cabin started to release. Around us, passengers unclenched their jaws, loosened their death grips on armrests. Breathed. I realized I was still holding Daniel's hand. "I'm sorry," I said, starting to pull away. "I didn't mean to. Don't apologize." He kept his grip gentle but present. "I've had partners who couldn't handle stress half as intense as what you just went through. You stayed conscious and responsive. That's more than most people manage. I nearly broke your fingers. I've had worse. Hostile takeover negotiations are brutal." He smiled then, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely warm. "Besides, I'd say we're past the point of formal introductions now. You can probably call me Daniel." "Sarah?" I offered my free hand for a shake, then realized the absurdity of the gesture. "Though I suppose you already knew that. You said it about 50 times during the attack, mostly in the context of, 'Oh God, Sarah, you're going to die. Why did you get on this plane?' Heat flooded my cheeks. That's mortifying. It's human." His expression softened. "What brings you to New York? Business or pleasure?" "Business." I finally released his hand, immediately missing the warmth. "I have a meeting tomorrow afternoon. Investors who might be interested in my operation." Something shifted in his eyes. Interest maybe, or recognition. "What kind of investors?" "A group called Whitmore Capital Partners. They're looking at sustainable agriculture ventures." "Robert Whitmore's group?" I stared at him. "You know them?" "I've crossed paths with Robert a few times. Old money, old school, very particular about who they work with." He studied my face with new intensity. "They called you to New York to discuss a cattle ranch in Texas?" "It's a significant opportunity for them," I said, hearing the defensiveness creep into my voice. "Grass-fed beef is a growing market. The water rights alone. I'm not questioning the opportunity." He held up a hand. "I'm impressed they found you. Robert's due diligence process is legendary. He doesn't waste time on meetings that aren't going somewhere." Or maybe he just wants to see if a Texas ranch woman can actually string a sentence together. The bitterness surprised me. I hadn't meant to say it out loud. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that what you're worried about? That they won't take you seriously?" "I run a cattle operation in the middle of nowhere. I haven't worn anything but jeans and flannel in a decade. My idea of a formal dinner is using the good silverware instead of the everyday stuff." I stared out the window at the clouds, now serene and unthreatening below us. "These people probably have wine that costs more than my monthly grocery budget. What am I supposed to say to them?" "The truth." His voice was quiet but firm. "Tell them what you told me. The land, the cattle, the generations of your family who built something out of nothing. Tell them about waking up at 4:30 every morning because those animals depend on you. Tell them about the drought and the disease and the market crashes, and how you're still standing." I turned to look at him. In the calmer air, with the adrenaline fading from my system, I could finally see him clearly. He was about my age, maybe a little older, with distinguished grey threading, through dark hair that was a touch too long for the corporate polish his suit suggested. His face bore the lines of someone who had smiled a lot once, but had forgotten how, or why. His hands, I noticed now that I wasn't crushing them, were well kept, but not soft. Not the hands of someone who had never worked. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. But I know what it feels like to be in over your head and too proud to admit it. I know what it's like to walk into a room full of people who've decided you don't belong before you've even opened your mouth. He paused. And I know that sometimes a stranger's kindness is easier to accept than help from anyone else. There was a story there, something painful hiding behind his careful words. But I didn't push. Some wounds need time before they'll bear examination. Thank you, I said instead, for the panic attack, for now, for not making me feel like a complete idiot. You're not an idiot. You're brave. It takes courage to do something that terrifies you. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing our initial descent into LaGuardia. 30 minutes until landing. 30 minutes until I would step into a world I didn't understand, fighting for everything that mattered on a battlefield where I didn't know the rules. What are you doing tomorrow morning? Daniel asked suddenly. I blinked at the question. I don't know. My meeting's not until 2. I was going to try to find the office building without getting lost. Have breakfast with me. The invitation hung in the air between us, unexpected and slightly terrifying in its own right. I fumbled for a response. I wouldn't want to impose. You wouldn't be. I had a meeting scheduled that just fell through. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. I know a place near Central Park. Good coffee, quiet, usually empty before 9. We could go over your presentation if you have one, talk through the investor meeting. Why would you do that? Because you helped me remember something I'd forgotten. His smile was small but genuine. That there are still people fighting for things that matter, not stock prices or quarterly returns, but real things, land, legacy, family history. He held my gaze. Let me help you keep fighting. I should have said no. I should have politely declined, thanked him for his kindness during the flight, and gone on my way. I didn't need help. I had never needed help. The independence that had kept me alive for 47 years screamed that accepting this offer was weakness, dependence, vulnerability. But vulnerability had kept me breathing through that turbulence. His hand had been the anchor when I had none. Okay, I heard myself say. Breakfast. Tomorrow morning. The plane began its descent into New York, and I watched the city materialize through the window, a sprawling mass of buildings and lights and impossibility. I was going to land in a place I'd never been, meet people I didn't understand, try to convince them that a woman from a dying Texas ranch was worth their millions. And somehow, impossibly, I wasn't facing it alone. Daniel helped me with my bag when we landed. The old duffel that had belonged to my father looked absurdly out of place in the sleek terminal, surrounded by designer luggage with wheels and designer people with smartphones. I caught him looking at it, and heat crept up my neck. It's functional, I said defensively. It's character. He handed it to me with surprising gentleness. This city is full of things that look expensive but have no substance. A bag that survived a few decades of real use. That's worth something. We walked through the terminal together, an unlikely pair. Him in his tailored suit, me in the nicest jeans I owned and a blazer I'd bought specifically for this trip that already felt wrong on my body. People flowed around us, everyone in a hurry, everyone knowing exactly where they were going. I stopped just inside the doors to ground transportation, overwhelmed by the noise, the crowd, the sheer density of humanity pressed into one space. Hey. Daniel's hand touched my elbow, light and grounding. You've got this. I don't know how to be here, I admitted. Everything moves so fast. Then move slow. You don't have to match their pace. He pulled a card from his wallet and pressed it into my hand. My cell's on there. The restaurant tomorrow is called Meridian, on West 67th. 8 o'clock? I looked at the card. Simple, elegant, his name embossed in subtle gold lettering. Daniel Carvalho, partner, a prestigious firm name I vaguely recognized. 8 o'clock, I confirmed. He held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Get some sleep tonight, Sarah Mitchell. Tomorrow we're going to make sure those investors see exactly what I saw on that plane. And what was that? Someone worth fighting for. He turned and disappeared into the crowd before I could respond, leaving me standing in the chaos of LaGuardia with his card in my hand and something stirring in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. My hotel was a modest place in Midtown, chosen because Marcus had insisted I stay somewhere presentable, and because modest was all I could afford. The room was tiny by my standards, a woman used to a farmhouse with 11 rooms and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides, but clean and functional. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my reflection in the dark window. Who was I, here in this city of glass and ambition? Back home, I knew exactly who I was. Sarah Mitchell, cattle rancher, hard as nails and twice as stubborn. The woman who kept a dying operation alive through drought and disaster. The woman who needed no one and nothing except the land beneath her feet. Here, I was just another country mouse lost in a maze of concrete and noise. I thought about Daniel's hand holding mine through the turbulence, about the steadiness of his voice, the way he'd anchored me when I was spiraling, about the breakfast invitation and the way he'd looked at me when he said I was worth fighting for. Dangerous thoughts for a woman who'd spent 12 years building walls. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. Sarah, did you land safely? How was the flight? Fine, I lied. I'm at the hotel. What do I need to know about tomorrow? We talked for an hour, going over the presentation, the financials, the talking points he'd prepared. I took notes on the hotel stationery, my handwriting small and cramped, trying to fit everything onto the tiny notepad. By the time we hung up, my head was swimming with numbers and strategies and phrases like value proposition and sustainable growth metrics. I didn't sleep well that night. The city never seemed to get quiet. Sirens, traffic, the persistent hum of 8 million people living their lives within a few miles of my window. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear a new sound and jolt awake, reaching for the shotgun I kept by my bed at home before remembering where I was. At 5 a.m, I gave up and got out of bed. Force of habit had me looking for boots to pull on, cattle to check, a routine to follow. Instead, I stood at the window and watched the sky lighten over Manhattan, feeling more alone than I had in years. At 7, I dressed in the nicest outfit I'd brought, a deep blue blouse, dark dress pants, the blazer that still felt like a costume. I tried to do something with my hair but gave up after 10 minutes, settling for a simple clip to keep it out of my face. My hands were shaking as I applied a minimal amount of makeup. Foundation, mascara, lip balm, more than I'd worn in a decade. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger. I grabbed Daniel's card and headed out into the city, armed with Google Maps and a desperate hope that I wouldn't get hopelessly lost. New York in the morning was a different beast than New York at night. The streets were crowded but purposeful, everyone walking with the determined stride of people who had somewhere important to be. I tried to match their pace and nearly twisted my ankle on a grate. After that, I walked at my own speed and let them flow around me. The restaurant was exactly where Daniel had said it would be, tucked into a quiet street near the park. It had the understated elegance of places that didn't need to advertise. No flashy signs, just a simple brass nameplate by the door. I hesitated on the sidewalk, suddenly terrified. What was I doing here? What made me think I could play in this world, even for a day? I was about to turn around and flee back to the hotel when the door opened and Daniel stepped out. He was dressed more casually today, still polished but no tie, the collar of his shirt open at the throat. His smile, when he saw me, was warm enough to melt ice. You came. I said I would. A lot of people say things they don't mean. He held the door open for me. I'm glad you're not one of them. The restaurant was quiet, exactly as he'd promised. We were seated at a corner table with a view of the street, and within moments, coffee appeared. Hot, rich, and strong enough to cut through my exhaustion. So, Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. Tell me about your meeting. Everything you know about Whitmore Capital Partners. I told him what Marcus had told me. The firm's history, their investment philosophy, the key players I'd be meeting. Daniel listened intently, occasionally asking questions that exposed gaps in my knowledge. They'll want to see confidence, he said finally. Not arrogance. They'll eat through arrogance in seconds. but genuine belief in what you've built. That I have. I know. He smiled. What you don't have is familiarity with how these rooms work. The unwritten rules. Such as? Such as, they'll test you. Not with questions about your numbers. Your accountant clearly knows what he's doing there. They'll test your composure, your judgment, your ability to handle pressure. By doing what? Challenging your assumptions, making you uncomfortable, seeing if you get defensive or if you can hold your ground. He took a sip of his coffee. They're not just investing in a ranch. They're investing in you, in your ability to make decisions under pressure, adapt to changes, handle problems they can't predict. I thought about the panic attack on the plane, about how close I'd come to completely falling apart in front of a stranger. I'm not sure I passed that test yesterday, I said quietly. You absolutely did. His gaze was direct. You didn't lose consciousness. You didn't become combative. You accepted help and used it. Those are exactly the qualities they're looking for. The ability to recognize when you need support and take it. I spent my whole life not needing support. And look where it's gotten you. Facing bankruptcy alone, too proud to ask for help until you had no choice. His voice was gentle, but the words still stung. There's strength in self-reliance, Sarah. But there's also a kind of arrogance, the belief that you have to do everything yourself, that accepting help is weakness. I wanted to argue, to defend the philosophy that had kept me alive and fighting for 12 years. But he wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. How do you know so much about me? I asked instead. I don't. Not really. But I recognize the type. His smile held a hint of self-deprecation. Takes one to know one. So you're a stubborn, self-reliant fool too? The worst kind. I spent 25 years building a career that everyone admired and nobody, including me, actually enjoyed. I have a beautiful apartment I'm never in, a car I never drive, and a phone that rings constantly with people who need something. From me. He set down his coffee cup. I was married once. Elena. We met in business school, got married too young, and spent 15 years trying to build a life together while both of us were really building our careers. What happened? She got tired of being alone in a marriage, found someone who was actually present. He shrugged, but I could see the old pain behind the casual gesture. Can't even blame her. By the time she left, I couldn't remember the last time we'd had dinner together, the last time I'd asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. I'm sorry. It was 5 years ago. I'm past the anger. Now I'm just trying to figure out who I am without the marriage, the 80-hour weeks, the endless deals. He met my eyes. That's why I'm here, actually, in New York. The firm is based in Boston. I told them I was scouting investment opportunities, but really I just needed to be somewhere that wasn't filled with memories of the life I used to have. And instead, you ended up on a flight with a panicking ranch woman. Life has a sense of humor. The waiter came with our food, eggs and toast for me, something more elaborate for Daniel that involved smoked salmon and herbs I couldn't identify. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Tell me about the ranch, Daniel said eventually. Not the business case, the real story. Why does it matter so much? I set down my fork and thought about how to answer. My great-great-grandfather came to Texas with nothing but a horse and a dream. This was in 1882. The land was practically free if you were willing to work it. And Lord knows, he was willing. He and my great-great-grandmother built the first house with their own hands, raised 7 children in 2 rooms. I could see it as I spoke, the photographs that lined the hallway back home, stern-faced ancestors in formal poses, the land stretching out behind them. Every generation added something. My great-grandfather built the cattle operation during a time when everyone said beef was dying. My grandfather held onto the land during the Depression when everyone around him was selling. My father... I paused, swallowing against the sudden tightness in my throat. My father kept it going through every challenge you can imagine. Drought, disease, market crashes. He had 2 heart attacks and kept working the next day because the cattle still needed feeding. And now it's your turn. Now it's my turn. I looked at Daniel, seeing the understanding in his eyes. It's not just land. It's not just cattle. It's a century and a half of my family's blood and sweat and tears. It's everything they sacrificed so I could have something to stand on. And I am not going to be the generation that lets it die. The intensity of my own voice surprised me. I'd said these words to myself 1,000 times, in the dark hours before dawn when the weight of the ranch felt crushing, but I'd never said them out loud to another person. Never trusted anyone enough to show them how much it mattered. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "They're going to love you," he said simply. "You don't know that. I know people. I've been reading rooms for 25 years, and I know that what you just showed me, that fire, that commitment, that refusal to give up, is exactly what investors look for." He squeezed my hand gently. "You're not going into that meeting to beg for money, Sarah. You're going in to offer them the opportunity of a lifetime. Make them believe that." I looked at our hands on the table, his fingers still wrapped around mine. It felt natural in a way that scared me, comforting in a way I'd told myself I didn't need. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. "Really? You don't owe me anything." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "When I was holding your hand on that plane, talking you through the panic, something broke loose in me. I can't explain it. I've been sleepwalking through my life for years, going through the motions, pretending everything was fine while feeling absolutely nothing." He met my eyes. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I felt something. Connection. Purpose. Like maybe helping you mattered in a way that my work hasn't mattered in years. That's a lot of pressure to put on a stranger. I know, I'm sorry. He pulled his hand back and I immediately missed its warmth. "I don't mean to overwhelm you. You've got enough on your plate without my existential crisis." "No," I said, surprising myself. "It's okay. I understand what you mean." He looked at me questioningly. "I've been alone for 12 years, I said. "By choice, mostly. After my father died and my brother left, I told myself I didn't need anyone, that it was safer that way, easier." I turned my coffee cup in my hands, watching the light play on the surface. But lonely too. Lonelier than I ever let myself admit. I want you, wherever you're listening, to tell me in the comments what city you're from. What corner of the world brought you to this story today? I love knowing that these words reach people in places I've never been, connecting us across distances that would have seemed impossible not so long ago. Drop your city in the comments. Let me know you're there. Daniel and I finished our breakfast and walked out into the morning together. The city felt less overwhelming with him beside me, his presence steady and grounding like it had been on the plane. "What time is your meeting?" he asked. 2:00. The Whitmore offices are on Park Avenue." "I know the building. Let me walk you through some scenarios." For the next 2 hours, we wandered through Central Park while Daniel played the role of various investors, throwing questions at me, challenging my assumptions, testing my composure. At first, I stumbled over my answers, getting defensive when he pushed back or flustered, when he changed direction. But gradually something shifted. I stopped trying to sound like what I thought a business person should sound like. I started sounding like myself, a Texas ranch woman who'd fought for everything she had and wasn't about to stop now. "Better," Daniel said as we stopped by the lake, watching a family of ducks glide past. "Much better. You're finding your voice." "It feels strange, like I'm playing a character." "You're not. You're just showing them a version of yourself that you've been hiding. The confident one, the one who knows what she's worth." He turned to face me. "That woman has been there all along. Running a 100,000-acre ranch doesn't happen by accident. You've just been too busy surviving to see your own strength." I thought about that as we walked on, about the years of waking before dawn and falling into bed after dark, about the endless problems solved and crises managed and decisions made, about the weight I'd carried alone, because I'd never believed anyone else could share it. "It's almost noon," Daniel said, checking his watch. "You should probably head back to the hotel, freshen up before the meeting." I nodded, suddenly nervous again. The morning had felt like a reprieve, a pocket of calm before the storm. Now reality was rushing back. Will you? I hesitated, not sure how to ask. Not sure if I should ask. I'll wait for you, he said, answering the question I couldn't form. There's a coffee shop across from the Whitmore building. I'll be there. When the meeting's over, whatever happens, come find me. You don't have to do that. I know. I want to. We stood there on the path, the city alive around us, and I felt something shift between us. Some invisible barrier lowering. Some wall beginning to crumble. Thank you, I said, for everything. The plane, the breakfast, this morning. I don't know how I would have... Sarah. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, clean and warm. Stop thanking me. Just go in there and show them who you are. The rest will take care of itself. Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed my cheek. It was brief, barely a brush of lips against skin, but it sent a shock through my entire body. For luck, he said, stepping back. Go. I'll see you on the other side. I walked away on unsteady legs, my cheeks still tingling where his lips had touched. Behind me, I could feel his eyes following me until I turned the corner and disappeared into the crowd. The meeting was in 3 hours. In 3 hours, I would face the investors who held the future of my ranch in their hands. In 3 hours, everything I'd fought for would either be saved or lost. But all I could think about was the way Daniel had looked at me, like I was something precious, like I was worth the fight. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me that way. I made it back to the hotel without getting lost, which felt like a victory in itself. In my room, I showered, dressed again in my meeting clothes, and stood in front of the mirror trying to see what Daniel saw. A woman worth fighting for. Could I be that? Could I let myself believe it? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You've got this. Remember, you're offering them an opportunity, not asking for charity. Show them Sarah Mitchell, and the money will follow. D. I saved his number to my contacts and read the message 3 more times. Then I squared my shoulders, gathered my materials, and headed out to face my future. Whatever happened in that meeting room, I wouldn't be facing it alone. And somehow, after 12 years of solitude, that felt like the biggest victory of all. The Whitmore Capital Partners offices occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower on Park Avenue. Standing on the sidewalk looking up, I felt the same dizzying vertigo I'd experienced on the plane. These people operated in a different atmosphere entirely, one where the air was thinner and the stakes were measured in millions. I took a deep breath, thought of Daniel waiting in the coffee shop across the street, and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was all marble and chrome, designed to intimidate. A security guard checked my ID against a list, then directed me to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. A young woman in a perfectly tailored suit met me on the 42nd floor. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Priya, Mr. Whitmore's assistant. He's ready for you. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? Water would be wonderful, thank you. She led me down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than my entire herd. At the end, a set of double doors opened onto a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. 3 people sat at a long table, and they all rose as I entered. Robert Whitmore was exactly what I'd expected. Silver-haired, patrician, with the kind of presence that came from a lifetime of being the most important person in every room. The woman beside him was younger, sharp-featured, with intelligent eyes that assessed me in a single glance. The third was a man about my age, softer around the edges, who smiled warmly as he extended his hand. Ms. Mitchell, welcome to New York. I'm Robert Whitmore. This is my daughter and partner, Caroline, and our head of agricultural investments, Thomas Chen. Thank you for having me. I shook each of their hands, keeping my grip firm, my eye contact steady. Show them Sarah Mitchell, Daniel had said. The money will follow. Please sit. Robert gestured to a chair across from them. We've reviewed your materials extensively. The Mitchell Ranch has an impressive history. 4 generations of my family, I said, settling into the leather chair. 143 years of continuous operation. And yet, You're here seeking outside investment. Caroline's voice was cool, analytical. That suggests the operation isn't as healthy as its history might indicate. Here it comes, I thought. The first test. You're right, I said, refusing to be defensive. The ranch is struggling. 3 years of drought followed by a disease outbreak that cost us nearly 40% of our herd. Market prices that haven't recovered since the pandemic disruptions. I met her gaze directly. I could pretend otherwise, but you've clearly done your homework. You know our numbers. We do. She tilted her head slightly. What we don't know is why we should believe you can turn it around. Because I've been turning things around my entire life. The words came out stronger than I'd intended, but I didn't back down. I took over the ranch at 35, with no formal training and no support. I've survived every challenge the land and the market have thrown at me. I'm still here. That's not luck. That's skill and determination. Thomas leaned forward, his expression interested. Walk us through your recovery plan. What would you do with our investment? This was familiar territory. Marcus and I had gone over this 100 times. I laid out the strategy: herd rebuilding, water infrastructure improvements, diversification into direct-to-consumer sales. I talked about sustainable practices, about the growing market for grass-fed beef, about the unique water rights that made our land valuable beyond its cattle capacity. They listened, asked questions, challenged assumptions. Caroline in particular pushed hard on my projections, questioning every number, every timeline. But I had done my homework too. I answered each challenge with data, with evidence, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her operation inside and out. After an hour, Robert held up a hand. Ms. Mitchell, may I be frank with you? I'd prefer it. We've met with dozens of agricultural operators over the past year. Most of them come in here with polished presentations and optimistic projections. They tell us what they think we want to hear. He paused, studying me with those sharp blue eyes. You've told us the truth, including the parts that don't make you look good. The truth is all I have to offer. I'm not going to pretend my situation is better than it is. But I'm also not going to pretend I can't fix it. Caroline exchanged a glance with her father. Something passed between them, some silent communication I couldn't read. We'd like to visit the ranch, she said, before we make any final decisions. Would that be possible? My heart leaped, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course. Anytime that works for your schedule. Next month, we have a trip to Austin planned. We could extend it. I'll make sure everything is ready for you. Robert stood and I rose with him. This has been a productive meeting, Ms. Mitchell. We'll be in touch with details. He shook my hand again, and this time there was warmth in his grip. It's refreshing to meet someone who still believes in the value of the land itself, not just what can be extracted from it. I walked out of that building feeling lighter than I had in years. Nothing was decided yet. The deal wasn't done. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to lose everything my family had built. Daniel was waiting exactly where he'd promised, at a corner table in the coffee shop with a clear view of the Whitmore building. When I walked in, he stood immediately, searching my face for news. Well, they want to visit the ranch. I couldn't keep the grin from spreading across my face. Next month, they're actually considering it. His smile matched mine, and before I knew what was happening, his arms were around me, pulling me into a hug that lifted my feet off the ground. I laughed, actually laughed, as he spun me in a circle right there in the middle of the coffee shop. I knew it, he said, setting me down but keeping his seat, hands on my shoulders. I knew they'd see what I see. I couldn't have done it without you. The preparation this morning, the confidence exercises. You did that yourself. I just reminded you it was there. We stood there, his hands still on my shoulders, his face close to mine. The post-victory adrenaline faded slightly, replaced by something warmer, more dangerous. Have dinner with me, he said softly, to celebrate. I should probably get back to the hotel, start preparing for the ranch visit. One dinner you can prepare tomorrow. His thumb traced a small circle on my shoulder, and I felt it through every nerve ending in my body. Let me take you somewhere special. Show you the New York that isn't about business deals and pressure. I should have said no. I should have thanked him for his help and returned to the safety of my hotel room, to the familiar isolation that had protected me for so long. Yes, I said instead. Dinner sounds wonderful. He took me to a tiny Italian restaurant in the West Village, the kind of place that didn't have a sign outside and required a reservation made weeks in advance. But Daniel knew the owner, and within minutes we were seated at a candlelit table in the corner, surrounded by the warm hum of conversation and the aroma of garlic and basil. How do you know this place? I asked, marveling at the hand-painted tiles on the walls, the mismatched china, the obvious love that had gone into every detail. I helped Marco, the owner, when a bigger restaurant group tried to buy him out and convert the space into a chain concept. We found a way to keep him independent. Daniel smiled at the memory. He's been trying to feed me ever since. Marco himself appeared at our table, a round man with a magnificent mustache and eyes that sparkled with genuine warmth. He kissed Daniel on both cheeks, then turned those sparkling eyes to me. And who is this beautiful lady? Daniel, you never bring anyone here. This must be special. Marco, this is Sarah. She's from Texas. She runs a cattle ranch. A rancher? Magnifico! Marco clasped my hand in both of his. Then you understand about taking care of the land, yes? About tradition, about family legacy? I do, I said, warming to him immediately. Then you will understand my food. I cook the way my grandmother taught me, the way her grandmother taught her. No shortcuts, no compromises. He beamed at us both. Tonight, I cook for you myself. You trust Marco, yes? Absolutely, Daniel said, and Marco disappeared into the kitchen, already calling orders to his staff. The meal that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Course after course of dishes that seemed simple but burst with flavors I couldn't identify. Pasta that Marco's wife made fresh that morning. Vegetables from a rooftop garden 3 blocks away. Wine from a small vineyard that had been in his family for generations. But it wasn't just the food that made the evening magical. It was the conversation. For hours, Daniel and I talked about everything and nothing. Our childhoods, our dreams, our disappointments, the mistakes we'd made and the lessons we'd learned from them. He told me about his father, a Brazilian immigrant who had worked his way up from janitor to factory foreman, who had drilled into Daniel the importance of education and hard work. About his mother, who had died when he was 12, leaving a void he'd spent his whole life trying to fill with achievements and success. I thought if I could just be successful enough, it would make up for losing her, he admitted, his voice soft in the candlelight. But you can't fill that kind of hole with money or titles. I think I always knew that. I just didn't want to accept it. What made you finally accept it? Eleanor leaving. He swirled the wine in his glass, watching the deep red catch the light. When she walked out, I expected to feel devastated, and I was for a while, but underneath the devastation, there was this terrible relief, like I'd been holding my breath for 15 years and could finally exhale. He looked up at me. What kind of person feels relieved when their marriage ends? A person who was drowning and didn't know it until they reached the surface. He stared at me for a long moment. That's exactly it. Exactly what it felt like. I told him about my own losses, my mother's illness, the way cancer had stolen her inch by inch while I watched helplessly, my father's death, sudden and brutal, a heart attack that took him between one breath and the next, my brother's abandonment, which had hurt worse than either death because he had chosen to leave. I told myself I was fine alone, I said, that I didn't need anyone, but the truth is, I was terrified of needing someone because everyone I'd ever needed had left me, one way or another. And now, I looked at this man across the table from me, this stranger who had held my hand through a storm, who had believed in me before I believed in myself, who was looking at me now with such tenderness it made my chest ache. Now I'm starting to wonder if being alone is really the same as being safe. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. his fingers intertwined with mine, warm and certain. "Sarah Mitchell," he said softly, "you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met. And I know this is crazy. I know we just met yesterday. But I don't want this to end when you go back to Texas." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying stay. Not forever. Just a few more days. Let me show you this city. Let me—" He hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his face. "Let me get to know you. The real you. Not just the rancher or the businesswoman. The person underneath all that strength." Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was insane. I had a ranch to run, a recovery plan to implement, 1,000 responsibilities waiting for me back in Texas. But sitting there in that candlelit restaurant with Daniel's hand in mine and hope blooming in my chest for the first time in years, rational didn't seem to matter anymore. 3 days, I heard myself say. I can stay 3 days. His smile was like the sunrise breaking over the Texas plains. Sudden, brilliant, and impossibly beautiful. Those 3 days changed everything. On the first morning, Daniel took me to the top of the Empire State Building at sunrise. We stood at the observation deck as the city woke up below us, the sky shifting from purple to pink to gold. I thought about how far I was from the ground, how high above everything solid and safe, and felt no fear at all, only wonder. "It's beautiful," I breathed, watching the light paint the skyscrapers in shades of amber and rose. "It is now." He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at me. We had breakfast at a diner in Hell's Kitchen, the kind of place where the waitress called everyone horn, and the coffee came in bottomless cups. Daniel ordered pancakes the size of my head, and we shared them, laughing as maple syrup dripped onto the Formica table. "This is more my speed than that fancy Italian place," I admitted, mopping up the last of the syrup with a piece of pancake. "I thought you might like it. You're not really a champagne and caviar kind of woman, are you?" "I wouldn't know. I've never had either." "Good." He grinned. "They're both overrated." That afternoon, we walked through Central Park, taking our time, stopping to watch street performers and feed the ducks by the pond. Daniel bought me a pretzel from a cart, and we sat on a bench in the sunshine, watching the world go by. "Tell me something about yourself that nobody knows," he said. I thought for a moment. "I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was little. Had the whole thing planned out. I was going to go to Texas A&M, become a large animal specialist, come back to the ranch and take care of our herd myself. What happened? Life. My mum got sick when I was 17. I deferred college to help care for her, then deferred again when she died to help my dad with the ranch. By the time things stabilized enough for me to think about leaving, I was 25 and the ranch needed me more than ever." I shrugged. "Some dreams have expiration dates, I guess." "That's not true." Daniel's voice was firm. "Dreams evolve, but they don't expire. You're still taking care of animals. You're still using that instinct for healing, just in a different way." "I never thought about it like that." "Maybe that's the problem. You've been so focused on what you didn't get to do that you've missed what you actually accomplished." He turned to face me on the bench. "You kept a 100-year-old operation alive through impossible circumstances. You cared for hundreds of animals, gave them good lives. You honored your family's legacy when everyone else abandoned it. That's not a failed dream, Sarah. That's a different kind of success." Tears pricked at my eyes and I blinked them back furiously. "You're going to make me cry in the middle of Central Park." "Would that be so terrible?" "I don't cry. Haven't cried in years." "Maybe that's part of the problem too." If you're still with me, still listening to Sarah's story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me if you're enjoying this journey. Is this story touching your heart? Are you rooting for Sarah and Daniel? Let me know. Your words mean more than you could imagine. On the second day, Daniel took me to the Brooklyn waterfront, where we watched the sun set over the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered like a jewel across the water. And for a moment, I understood why people loved this place. Not for its power or its wealth, but for its beauty. Its impossible, overwhelming, take your breath away beauty. "I have a confession to make," Daniel said, his shoulder brushing mine as we leaned against the railing. "What's that?" I looked you up. After we landed that first day, I read about the Mitchell Ranch, about your family history, about the financial struggles. He turned to look at me. I knew about the Whitmore meeting before you told me. I should have been angry, should have felt violated, manipulated. But all I felt was curiosity. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want there to be any secrets between us. And because... He hesitated. Because I want you to know that I didn't help you because I felt sorry for you, or because I saw an investment opportunity. I helped you because from the moment you grabbed my hand on that plane, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Connection. Real, honest, human connection. And looking me up was part of that connection. I wanted to understand you, who you were, what you were fighting for. The more I learned, the more I admired you. His voice dropped. And the more I wanted to know you beyond the facts on a screen. I thought about how I would have felt yesterday, before the meeting, before these 2 days of walking and talking and slowly falling into something neither of us had expected. I would have felt exposed, invaded. Now, I just felt seen. I'm glad you told me, I said finally. And I understand why you did it. I probably would have done the same thing, if I'd known how. You're not angry? I'm surprised at how not angry I am. I turned to face him, leaning my hip against the railing. Daniel, I've spent 12 years protecting myself from everyone, building walls so high that nobody could get through. And then you came along, and in 3 days, you've dismantled more of those walls than I ever thought possible. Is that a good thing? I don't know yet, but it feels like one. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening air. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Sarah, my name on his lips, was like a prayer. I'm going to kiss you now. If that's not what you want, tell me and I'll stop. But I need you to know that I've been wanting to do this since the moment you laughed on that plane, when I thought you'd forgotten how. I didn't tell him to stop. His lips met mine softly at first, a question more than a statement. I answered by leaning into him, my hands finding the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and I felt something crack open inside me, something that had been sealed shut for so long I'd forgotten it existed. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, the city lights had come on fully across the water, turning Manhattan into a constellation of stars. Wow, Daniel whispered. Yeah. I touched my lips, still tingling from the pressure of his. Wow. We walked along the waterfront for hours after that, holding hands like teenagers, stopping every few blocks to kiss again. Each kiss was different, some urgent and hungry, others soft and sweet, all of them feeling like doors opening to rooms I'd never known existed in my own heart. He told me about his dreams for the future, leaving the firm, starting something of his own, maybe consulting for family businesses like the ones he'd spent his career helping to merge and acquire. I've learned a lot about what makes them work, he said, and what destroys them. I could help people avoid the mistakes I've watched others make. I told him about my fears, that even with the Whitmore investment, it might not be enough, that the ranch was too far gone to save, that I would be the one who finally let 4 generations of Mitchells down. You won't, he said with quiet certainty. And even if the worst happened, even if you lost the land, you wouldn't be letting anyone down. You'd be a woman who fought with everything she had for something she believed in. There's no shame in that. Easy to say when you haven't lost everything. I have lost everything, maybe not land or money, but everything that mattered. My marriage, my sense of purpose, my ability to feel anything real. He stopped walking, turned to face me under a streetlight. And you know what I've learned? You can rebuild. You can start over. It's terrifying and painful and humbling, but it's possible. And sometimes what you build the second time is stronger than what you lost. On the 3rd day, my last full day in New York, Daniel rented a car and drove us out of the city. I want to show you something, he said, refusing to reveal our destination despite my persistent questioning. We drove for 2 hours, leaving the highways behind for winding country roads that reminded me achingly of home. The landscape was different, greener, more wooded, lacking the vast openness of Texas. But there was something familiar in the way the land rolled and dipped, in the quiet that settled as the city noise faded away. We ended up at a small farm in the Hudson Valley, a stone farmhouse surrounded by pastures where sheep grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. "What is this place?" I asked as Daniel parked the car. "It belongs to a friend of mine, Jack and his wife Maria. They left corporate life 10 years ago to start this place. Everyone thought they were crazy." He smiled. "Now they supply wool to some of the most exclusive fashion houses in the world, and they've never been happier." Jack met us at the gate, a bearish man with a full beard and permanent smile lines around his eyes. Maria, small and dark-haired, appeared from the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. "Danny," Jack enveloped Daniel in a bear hug. "You never visit anymore. Too busy making millions?" Something like that. Daniel extracted himself from the hug. "This is Sarah. She's a rancher from Texas." "A real rancher?" Maria's eyes lit up. "You have to tell me everything. These sheep are the closest I get to actual livestock management, and half the time I feel like I'm making it up as I go along." We spent the afternoon touring the farm, discussing animal husbandry and land management, comparing notes on the challenges of running an agricultural operation in an age that seemed increasingly hostile to such endeavors. Jack and Maria were warm, genuine people who had built something beautiful through sheer determination and love. "It wasn't easy," Maria admitted as we sat on their porch, watching the sun sink toward the hills. "We lost money the first 3 years. Had to take out a second mortgage just to keep the lights on. There were times I thought we'd made a terrible mistake." "What kept you going?" I asked. "Each other." She reached for Jack's hand. "And the belief that what we were doing mattered, that there was still a place in the world for people who cared about the land, about doing things the right way." She smiled at me. "You understand that, don't you? The feeling that if you give up, something irreplaceable will be lost." "Yes," I whispered, my throat tight. "I understand exactly." On the drive back to the city, I was quiet, processing everything I'd seen and felt. Daniel let the silence stretch, his hand finding mine on the center console. "Thank you," I said finally. "For today. For all of it." "Did it help?" "More than you know. Seeing them, what they've built, it gives me hope. Real hope, not just the desperate kind that comes from having no other choice." That's what I wanted, to show you that it's possible, that people like us, people who care about things that can't be measured in quarterly earnings, can still find a way to thrive. People like us. The phrase wrapped around my heart and settled there, warm and bright. That night, we had dinner at Daniel's apartment. He cooked for me, a simple meal of grilled fish and vegetables, nothing fancy, but prepared with obvious care. His apartment was high in a building overlooking the park. All clean lines and expensive furniture that looked like it had never been used. "It's beautiful," I said, wandering to the window to look out at the city lights. "But it doesn't feel like you." "It's not. A designer did the whole thing when I bought the place. I think I picked out maybe 2 items in the entire apartment." He came to stand beside me. "The truth is, I've never really lived here. I just sleep here between business trips." "That sounds lonely." "It was. Is." He turned to face me. "Sarah, I know this is happening fast. I know we've only known each other for a few days. But I meant what I said before. I don't want this to end. I have to go home tomorrow. The ranch. I know. I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm asking..." He took a breath. "I'm asking if you'd let me come visit. See your world the way you've seen mine." The thought of Daniel on the ranch, seeing the land that had shaped me, meeting the animals I cared for, walking the same ground my great-great-grandfather had walked, it should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt right. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." He kissed me then, and it was different from the kisses we'd shared before. Deeper, more certain, a promise wrapped in pressure and breath. We stood at the window for a long time after, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the city sparkle below us. I thought about the turbulence that had brought us together, the storm that had seemed so terrifying at the time. And I realized that sometimes the things that shake us most are the same things that set us free. The next morning, Daniel drove me to the airport. We stood at the security checkpoint, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. "Call me when you land," he said, his hands on my waist. "I will. And let me know about the Whitmore visit. I want to hear everything." "You'll be the first one I call." He pulled me into a hug, and I breathed in the scent of him, that clean, warm cologne that I would forever associate with safety and possibility. "Sarah Mitchell," he murmured against my hair. "You walked into my life during a storm and completely turned it upside down." "Is that a complaint?" "It's the best thing that's happened to me in years." He pulled back to look at my face. "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me in. Thank you for holding my hand when I was falling apart." He kissed me one last time, soft and sweet, a promise of things to come. I walked through security with tears in my eyes, tears I hadn't shed in years, finally breaking free. When I turned back for one last look, he was still standing there, watching me go, his hand raised in farewell. The flight home was smooth, no turbulence, no panic attacks. I sat by the window and watched the landscape change below me, from the urban sprawl of the East Coast to the vast, empty beauty of the heartland. And I thought about everything that had changed in 4 short days. I had gone to New York terrified and alone, convinced I was fighting a losing battle for something that might already be gone. I was returning with hope, real hope, and something even more precious: connection. The knowledge that I wasn't alone anymore, that somewhere in this world there was a man who saw me, truly saw me, and thought I was worth fighting for. When the plane touched down in Dallas, my phone buzzed with a text. "I miss you already. When can I come see your world?" I smiled, typed my response, and walked out into the Texas sunshine, feeling, for the first time in 12 years, like I was coming home to a future instead of just a past. 2 weeks later, Daniel stood on the porch of the Mitchell farmhouse, watching the sunset over the land that had been in my family for 4 generations. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," he said softly. I came to stand beside him, 2 glasses of sweet tea in my hands. "Wait until you see it at dawn. When the light hits the prairie just right, it looks like the whole world is made of gold." He took the glass I offered, his fingers brushing mine. "Show me, tomorrow morning. I want to see everything." So I did. Over the next 3 days, I showed him everything. The cattle grazing in the north pasture, the old barn where my great-grandfather had stored his first harvest, the spot by the creek where my parents had been married. I introduced him to Ranger, who sniffed him suspiciously before deigning to accept a carrot from his hand. I taught him how to check a fence line, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to listen to the land and hear what it was telling you. And somewhere in those 3 days, watching him fall in love with my world the way I had started to fall in love with him, I realized that the turbulence on that plane had been a gift, a terrifying, unexpected gift that had cracked me open just enough to let the light in. The Whitmore deal went through 6 weeks later. Robert and Caroline flew down for the signing, and I watched them shake hands with Daniel, who had somehow become an unofficial advisor to the negotiations, with a sense of surreal gratitude. "You've got a good man there," Caroline said to me privately, nodding toward where Daniel and her father were discussing sustainable grazing practices. "He turned down a position at our firm, said he was considering a change of direction." "What kind of change?" She smiled. "I think you might have something to do with it." A year later, Daniel moved to Texas. Not to the ranch, that felt too fast even for us, but to a small house in the nearest town, close enough to visit every day, but far enough to give us both the space we needed to figure out what we were building. He started a consulting firm, helping family agricultural operations navigate the complex world of corporate finance. His first client was me, His second was a young couple trying to save their family vineyard in the hill country. Word spread, and soon he had more work than he could handle. You know, he said one evening as we sat on my porch watching the stars emerge, I spent 25 years helping companies grow bigger, helping them swallow each other up, become more efficient, more profitable, and I was miserable. And now I spend my days helping families keep what they've built, helping people like you find ways to survive in a world that doesn't always value what they're doing. He reached for my hand, and I've never been happier. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, mixed with the prairie air. That turbulence on the plane, I said. I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to me. I was so scared. And now? Now, I think maybe it was the universe's way of shaking me loose, breaking me open so I could finally let someone in. He kissed the top of my head. Best storm I ever flew through. We sat there until the stars filled the sky, two people who had found each other in the chaos and decided to build something together, not a merger or an acquisition, but a partnership in the truest sense. Two lives joining not to become something bigger, but to become something stronger. The ranch is thriving now. The Whitmore investment funded the improvements we needed, and the sustainable practices we implemented have attracted attention from agricultural journals and environmental groups alike. My name has been mentioned in articles about the future of American ranching, and while the attention still makes me uncomfortable, I've learned to accept it. But the real change isn't in the land or the cattle or the bottom line. The real change is in me. I smile more now, laugh more, cry when I need to, without shame. I've learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help doesn't mean you failed, that letting someone love you is the bravest thing you can do. And every morning, when I wake up before dawn to check on the herd, I think about that flight from Dallas to New York, about the storm that seemed so terrifying, and the stranger who held my hand through it. The turbulence wasn't in the sky that day, it was inside me. Years of fear and loneliness and stubborn independence, all shaken loose in those terrible, wonderful minutes at 35,000 feet. Daniel was right about one thing. The real storm was always internal. And sometimes the only way through it is to let someone help you fly. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for being here. Thank you for walking this journey with Sarah and Daniel, for believing in second chances and unexpected connections. I hope their story touched something in your heart. Now, I want to ask you something. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Drop your number in the comments below. And if you have your own story of finding love when you least expected it, of someone who held your hand through your personal turbulence, I'd love to hear about it. Because that's what stories are for, aren't they? To remind us that we're not alone, that somewhere out there, someone else understands, that even in the darkest storms, there might be a hand reaching out, waiting to guide us home. Thank you for listening. Until next time.